and let us all do we can to build a better future.
Yeah. Well, we got to move on to one of the more disturbing stories that I've encountered is since a lot of this nonsense began. ProPublica, they do some great journalism, public interest journalism. Essentially, there is a school districts in Indiana. Well, okay, many school districts around the country charge textbook fees. If your kids go to public school, they're still expected to pay what may be in some cases hundreds of dollars, either in purchasing or renting or just textbooks during the school year. And what apparently is going on in Indiana, this area in Indiana, and I'm sure it's happening elsewhere, is that parents who are not able to pay these textbook fees are finding themselves being sued by the school districts.
Okay. Look. Hey, in Indiana's schooling system, what district is this in Indiana? Because again, it's kind of it's.
Well, there's one is city of Mishawaka is one of them that's in here. I mean, but this is just, and we have people who have been making payments who are doing their best, but they're laid off from work or they're having financial hardships, where a lot of people are having right now. So the schools are turning them over to lawyers who are suing them. And in some cases, and this is what we have here with default judgments, and this is one of the problems that I've spoken about in the past on this show, is that what happens is people think that their affairs are in order. They are sued. They face a lawsuit. Either they're not properly served with the paper. They get what they call gutter service, where the process server just tosses the service papers into the gutter in front of their house and walks off. Or they're getting service. They're contacting the law firm. Hey, what can I work with you? The law firm is saying, yeah, we can work with you. But then they proceed with the lawsuit anyways. The person doesn't show up in court because they don't even know about the lawsuit, or they think it's all been settled. And the judge enters a default judgment, which means that the person is liable for paying that back. Now, when you have a judgment, that is one of the more difficult things to get off your credit report, because first of all, it's one of the worst things you can have in your credit report. It brings your credit score way down. I think it's like 100 points. Second thing that it'll do is it will stay there until the judgment has been paid off, or I believe it's 7 years. Here's the thing, though, with those I think it's 7 years. They can keep renewing the judgment with the statute of limitation. So if it gets near the statute of limitation on that judgment, all the plaintiff has to do is go back to court, ask to renew it. So this can remain on your credit report for the rest of your life in some cases.
Wow. Oh, goodness. Okay.
And the other thing the other thing that happens here is this is where you start hearing about debtors' prisons. People will say, well, people are being put into prison for not paying their debts. That's not actually what's happening. What's happening is that after a default judgment like this is entered, the person doesn't even know that the judgment has been entered in against them. They don't know anything about what's happened. The court will usually send them, at the request of the plaintiffs or the plaintiff's attorney, will send them a notice asking them to come in for a financial examination. You go into court, the plaintiff's attorney is there, you're sworn in, and the plaintiff's attorney asks you some questions about your financial situation, or you fill out a form about your financial situation so that the plaintiff knows his or her remedies. Can they garnish your wages? Can they attach a bank account? Is there property that they can attach? If you don't show up for that financial examination because you may not even know about it, they can put out a bench warrant on you. And that's how people end up getting arrested. So, I mean, this is, again, if this is happening here in Indiana, my guess is this is happening elsewhere, and we might end up seeing, in addition to the insult of having to pay for your children's textbooks in a public school, we are now saying that these folks are going to be subject to having their credit histories hit badly, which makes it difficult to get jobs or an apartment to live in, by the way, or even insurance in some cases. And that they might be subject to arrest if they're not keeping in touch with the court or with the plaintiff at this time. And that they have to move or something, which is very common in these times when people are looking for work or have to be with family members. The setup for the default judgment and the possible incarceration or the bench warrant going out because somebody has left town, that increases dramatically. So this could, again, we talk about domino effects a lot on this show. This is one of them.
So
Wow.
again, it's not a debtor's prison. There are extra steps involved that make it a very good choice for justice. So can you imagine that? You're trying to go, okay, can I feed my family this month, or do I pay for my kid's books that he doesn't even have because they're not in school, because we don't have internet? And Elena, you've talked at great length about the issue of moving kids online in education, just as a concept, the way that we currently structure our economy, and how we've not given people internet or laptops when they need those for that purpose, as a possible issue.
We don't have public Wi-Fi.
No,
Yeah.
we
We
don't
don't
have
have
any of
s-
that. But yet the
we
rest
don't
of the
have
world
systems
has
that
it.
say, we treating it as a utility, which it is at this point.
Mhm.
Particularly when you're expected to file for unemployment benefits online.
Yeah. And
You
so
know,
that so then you're in that situation. The school's really unhappy with you because they got a giant stick up their butt, and they decide to go and fine you or charge you for these books that you can't use because of all this other issues, and you have no money for it. And then they go to a judge, because that's the reasonable thing to do, and put this together. And then they don't serve you properly. And I'm sure that it's not easy to prove that you were not properly served, because I would assume it's like
all
proving
they
a
have
negative.
to do, the service processor basically signs an affidavit. Now, it's a sworn affidavit that, and they can get into real trouble if it's proven that they lied. But again, how do you prove that they lied?
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, it's a process. It's a slow moving train wreck.
Right.
That we're going to start seeing repeated. And it's going to be simple people, just ordinary people going about their business, that are going to get trapped in this, and that you're not necessarily going to hear much about it in the media. And also, people tend to not be sympathetic to people who don't pay their debts. Even if it's a debt that they can't pay for children's textbooks for children who are in public schools. And I keep reminding people of this, that we've actually added on significant costs when it comes to textbooks. And if a child wants to go to public school, they may be required to buy uniforms. They may be required to buy textbooks. They're required to buy school supplies. In some schools, the kids are expected to provide supplies for the school, like toilet paper. It's things like that. So we've created a lot of costs for public education. All right. But now we're taking it a step further, putting people into the civil court system and the credit score racket, which could eventually escalate into the criminal court system, because then you basically got contempt of court going on. And what happens when a single mom gets hauled off to a jail cell because she's in contempt of court, and her kids come home to an empty home? They don't know what to do. A neighbor calls Child Protective Services. Now we know what happens.
So again, with all this that is happening, again, the media is still surprised that Americans are right now shoplifting to get food, because again, we're stuck with all these horrible choices. Do I pay the electric bill? Do I pay the heating bill? Do I pay the water bill? Do I now have to pay the bill on my kids' books, even though they're not at school? Something that Daniel and Laney already stated. And now, oh wait, I have no money for food.
Better go shoplift.
Gotta go shoplift. And the thing is, I'm not going to condemn that person for shoplifting for food, because you know what? No one wants to see a loved one starve. No one wants to see a loved one die of hunger or be in pain of hunger. And yet here, the richest country in the world, in human history, we cannot take care of our own people. If the empire ever falls, I'm very curious to see what historians will say about us at this moment in time, when we had all this resources. It'll be an irony among irony. They had all this money, yet they couldn't take care of their people.
Yeah, and it's just a very sad situation that we find ourselves in, where this is a reality that we are legitimately talking about, a story about. Here's how we go from not paying your textbook fees to prison, family separation, which, by the way, costs the state a huge amount of money to administer all of these things, and it is almost always far more than the judgment costs we're talking about. And on top of that, something else to think about: now that the judges are the prisons are not being filled with cannabis enthusiasts.
Yeah.
This is a likely altered way of filling those jails.
And keep in mind, as I reported, I think it was either last year or earlier this year, there are many prisons or jail systems where you're required to pay for your stay in jail. So this person who gets hauled in for a contempt of court because they didn't show up, all of a sudden now they may be required to pay $30 a day or whatever the fine is.
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't pay that off, they can get the same judgment process happens all over again with the debt and being brought into court and going back to jail because they can't pay off the debt from the time that they were put into jail because they couldn't pay off a debt and didn't show up in court on time.
So I think we got to name this segment something like debtor's prison with extra steps.
Yeah. Yep.
It is. But this is the poverty trap. This is one of the poverty traps. Why people say it's expensive to be poor.
Yeah. And
when you're poor, you're buying the cheapest things possible, which don't last as long. So you have to buy them more often, or you're buying cheap shoes because you have to have shoes. You can't go anywhere without shoes. Yet you have to replace them more often because they keep on falling apart and they're not as good for your feet, which affects your feet, your back, your muscles and your joints. And then, you're not feeling so great. And then you end up sick and having to get medical treatment, or you can't work. This is the kind of thing that happens when we allow poverty to run rampant in this country or in any country at all. There are costs to poverty, and alleviating poverty, in my view, ought to be, the top priority of any government. If you are going to have a government, you're alleviating
100%.
poverty. Yeah. And it's not. It simply is not. In fact, it's become a feature, not a bug, in the declining and decaying U.S. empire.
Yeah. And I think I'll just add a final quote from Bernie Sanders when he was talking on this very similar issue when he was running. I forget which campaign it was. It's really expensive to be poor.